Hello everybody, welcome back to Brainstorm lore, and welcome back to the early history of Middle-earth. The last time we saw how the Valar, essentially the gods of Arda, had made their first attempt at lighting up the new world, and how Melkor, essentially Middle-earth's devil, decided to once again try and break their toys, only this time he succeeded and then promptly fled back to his fortress in the north before they could catch him. Most of the Valar, especially Tulkas, would have loved nothing more than to wrest Melkor out of his little hidey hole and give him what for. But unfortunately, they had bigger problems to worry about. The destruction of the lamps had caused their light to be released in the form of firestorms that swept across the entire planet. The seas boiled and the mountains quivered. By the time the Valar had managed to stabilize the world, the damage had already been done. Where once there had been one continent, there were now four. Middle-earth itself, the Dark Land, the Land of the Sun, and in the west, the Land of Aman. It was here that the Valar settled, establishing their kingdom of Valinor and consecrating the very land and waters of it so that nothing could be corrupted or die. Because of this, Aman is also known as the Undying Lands, and functions as a kind of pseudo-afterlife for the elves, who go there after they get tired of living in Middle-earth. For those of you who are only familiar with the movies, this is where Frodo, Gandalf, and Bilbo were sailing to at the end of Return of the King. Of course, with the lamps destroyed, the world was once again in darkness, except for the light of what few stars Varda, Queen of the Valar, had already set into the sky. And so Yavanna, goddess of green and growing things, sang into being a pair of magical trees. These were Telperion, the silver tree, and Laurelin, the golden tree. The Silmarillion describes them as follows, quote, "The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were a shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the newly opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground, and from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light." End quote. Thus began the years of the trees. Light returned to Arda, and for the first time, time itself was counted. Each day in the years of the trees was comprised of 12 hours. For half the day, the light of one of the trees would shine brightly while the others was dimmed. Then, on the 6th and 12th hours respectively, they would trade places. However, this light was limited only to Aman. It did not shine across the entire world as the light of the two lamps had, and so Middle-earth remained in shadow. While the other Valar were busy establishing themselves in Valinor, Aule, the divine smith, grew impatient. The Valar had been sent to Arda to prepare it for the coming of the mortal races, the so-called children of Ilúvatar, who currently slept and were hidden in a special place that only the Creator knew of. But Aule was unwilling to wait. He yearned for students to teach his skill, and for others to share with his love of crafting and making things. And so he decided one day to try his own hand at creating life. As a god of the earth, Aule took 7 stones and from them carved 7 beings. Aule soon discovered, though, that while his creations could move and speak, it was only when he willed them to. Otherwise, they were still and lifeless as the rocks from which they were made. Without his will to animate them, they were essentially puppets in want of a puppeteer. It was then that Ilúvatar, who of course knew all things, spoke to the god of the earth, chastising him for his folly, for only Ilúvatar possessed the power to create life. A rather contrite Aule explained that he had never intended anything malicious by this deed. He explained to Ilúvatar that he had only wanted friends and students to share his gifts with. Still, Aule recognized that he had done wrong, and so picked up a hammer with which to smash his creations. Suddenly, all 7 of them fell back from him, cowering in fear. Ilúvatar had sympathized with Aule and had decided to bring his creations to life. Thus, the 7 fathers of the dwarves came to be. However, Iluvatar told Aule that he had always intended that the elves should be the first mortals upon Arda, and he did not appreciate having his plan disrupted in this way. He thus commanded Aule to put the 7 dwarves to sleep, and that they should remain so until after the awakening of the elves. He also warned the smith of the Valar that forever after there would be strife between his creations and the first children of Iluvatar. And this is one of the reasons why elves and dwarves have never really gotten along with each other. Aule told no one else of what had happened except for his wife Yavanna, and now she too became concerned. When the mortal races first awakened and were given their dominion of the world as Iluvatar had planned, what would become of the forests? What would become of the trees that she loved best of all things that grew? Yavanna took her concerns to Manwe, who reassured her that Iluvatar had planned for this. He told her that when the children of Iluvatar first awaken, so too will awaken those that will protect the forests and serve as the shepherds of the trees, those that we know as the Ents. And so Yavanna left Manwe, content in the knowledge that at the very least her creations would have a voice of their own. And Yavanna needed all the comfort that she could find, for while the other Valar were busy setting up Valinor and Varda was setting new stars in the sky, Yavanna would cross Ulmo's oceans to Middle-earth and observe with dismay how all plants great and small were withering away in the darkness that covered the rest of the world. Orome, the huntsman, was the only other one of the Valar who regularly journeyed to Middle-earth in those days, and the tidings he brought back to Valinor were just as grim. For while the birds and the beasts still lived, they were being stalked by dark monstrosities brought into existence by Melkor. Many of these Orome hunted down, so that all of Melkor's creations learned to fear him, the sound of his hunting horn Valaroma and the tread of his great steed Nahar. On one of these many journeys, Orome happened across the place where the Lamp of Illuin had once been, atop of its tower Helkar. In its place was now a great inland sea, the Sea of Helkar. And at an isolated place along the eastern shoreline, known as the Bay of Cuivienen, Orome found a group of people wandering around and looking at the stars. It was then that he realized that he had discovered the first children of Iluvatar, the Quendi, the elves. I will talk about the elves in greater detail in the next video, but suffice to say, after he'd made contact with them, Orome headed back to Valinor as quickly as possible to let the other Valar know what he had found. After receiving these tidings, the Valar decided that the time had finally come to settle accounts with Melkor. After sending a few of the Maiar to watch over the elves, the Valar marched northwards toward the Iron Mountains and the great fortresses of Utumno and Angbad, where Melkor had his seat of power. There are no details as to this great battle between the Valar and Melkor. All the elves ever knew about it was that the earth shook violently beneath their feet, the waters of Cuivienen roiled as if with typhoon winds, and to the north the sky blazed with light brighter than any they had ever seen. So we can at least assume that it was quite a cataclysmic event. But at long last, the forces of Melkor were soundly crushed. A few, like his chief lieutenant Sauron, were able to escape into hiding. As for Melkor himself, Tulkas the Strong managed to wrestle him out of his hole and bound him with the great chain Anganor, forged by Aule for specifically that purpose. Melkor was then dragged off to Valinor, and it was decided that he would be imprisoned for 3 ages of the world within the halls of Mandos. Once he'd served his time, he would be allowed a chance to plead for clemency. So, all's well that ends well, at least for the time being. Next episode will be about the early history of the elves, the first sundering of their race, and the great journey that most of them, though not all, undertook to cross the sea to Valinor. Until then. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out our website at studiobrainstorm.net. And if you have a story that you think is worth telling, we are more than happy to help you publish it. Thank you, and have a nice day.